Good evening, everyone. My name is Tappy Lung, and I am the president of the U.S.-China Strategic Studies Organization here at the Elliott School of International Affairs. On behalf of the USCSSO and the Onero Institute China program, it is my great pleasure to welcome you all here tonight to our U.S.-China Youth Expo on strategic networks in the Indo-Pacific. Tonight, we are joined by a familiar face here at the USCSSO, an expert on all things US-China, a longtime supporter of our organization, and a teacher to many of us in this room, Professor Robert Sutter, Professor of Practice of International Affairs here at the Elliott School. During this next hour, we will be discussing with Professor Sutter US-China's policies and strategies in the ever-important Indo-Pacific region. Stretching from the Indian Ocean to the west coast of the United States, the Indo-Pacific is a center of global trade and of commerce, accounting for 65% of the world's population and 63% of the world's GDP. Earlier this year, the Biden administration unveiled its Indo-Pacific strategy and its Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, aimed at increasing US engagement with allies in the region. Meanwhile, China continues to push for greater economic integration in the region through the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership and its application to join the CPTPP. Today, we will discuss these regional networks and their broader implications for the US-China relationship. Moderating our discussion tonight is the director of the Onero Institute China program, Mike Wu. Originally from Shandong, China, his primary area of interest is US-China civil communications. Mike will introduce Professor Sutter, and Professor Sutter will deliver his introductory remarks. Then we will enter a moderated question and answer period. Finally, we will open the floor to audience questions. For audience members in the room today, please raise your hand and a microphone will be brought to you. For those of you who are joining us virtually, feel free to ask questions in the chat and we will try to cover as many as possible during the Q&A session. Please note that we will be recording tonight's session. Without further ado, please give a round of applause for our moderator, Mike, and our speaker, Professor Robert Sutter.
Welcome to the second event of our US-China Youth Expo series, Indo-Pacifics. So just a little speaker bio for our lovely speaker, Professor Sutter today. Professor Sutter is a professor of practice of international affairs at the Elliott School of George Washington University. He also served as the director of the school's main undergraduate program, involving over 2,000 students from 2013 to 2019. As a PhD graduate in history and East Asian languages from Harvard University, Sutter has published 22 books and over 300 articles and several hundred government reports dealing with contemporary East Asian and Pacific countries' their relations with the United States. Sutter's government career saw service as senior specialist and director of the Foreign Affairs and National Defense Division of the Congressional Research Service, the National Intelligence Officer for East Asia and the Pacific at the U.S. government's National Intelligence Council, the China Division Director at the Department of State's Bureau of Intelligence and Research, and professional staff member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And Professor Sutter, if you're ready, you may begin.
Thanks very much. We're going to be talking about the Indo-Pacific strategy, but I wanted to, first of all, thank you all for being invited to this. I'm a great believer in student empowerment, and I have this philosophy that actually when you get something done here on the campus, get a student group to do it. And this is a really good student group for doing these sorts of things. So thanks for coming. And what I wanted to do is put the discussion tonight in context, and help you understand, share my views with you on how I see this kind of situation. Let me just explain it a little bit. You're familiar with the Chinese Party Congress that just took place, and Xi Jinping said, steady as she goes. He's going to be continuing his kind of approach that's been very problematic for the United States. But America was very slow in reacting to this kind of situation. The government was slow in doing this, but over the last 4 or 5 years, we've had the emergence in Washington. It really started here in Washington of a whole new way of looking at China and the practices of China and what they mean for the United States. And what you find is that a coalition came together in the Trump administration, and it continues in the Biden administration, of senior officials aligning with bipartisan majorities in the Congress in pushing forward their tough policy toward China. on all these different challenges. The Indo-Pacific strategy is one element, and that's the point I want to get at. The context is one of an overall hardening of American relations with China. This has been going on since the Trump national security strategy of December 2017. And people in the country didn't know about this. The media didn't pay much attention to it, but the people in the Congress did. And bipartisan majorities right away joined up with them and said, this is what we have to do. And it's been that way ever since. And this year is more powerful than ever. That's what's interesting for me anyway. 2022 is a banner year for this type of cooperation. And it's not Congress trying to take power away from the president trying to take power away from Congress. That's the usual thing that happens. It's symbiosis. It's a symbiosis. They're cooperating. You know, you do this, we do that, and they're moving forward. And so Mr. Xi Jinping, in his determination, is meeting the Washington consensus. And this Washington consensus is just as determined and actually, I think, pretty effective in what they're doing. So this is the situation we face. So let me just talk a little bit about the challenges that are seen by this group. The challenges are many. There's so many. What the Xi Jinping's China is doing has so many challenges for the United States. But basically, you can characterize them in areas of security, economics, and governance. And two of them are seen as basically existential, things that are fundamental. And the first one is the balance of power in Asia. And China has been expansionist and it's moving in various ways, trying to undermine US allies' alliances and become the leading power in Asia, the dominant power in Asia. I like to use the word dominant because that's what America worries about, dominance. And so the upshot here, this is a fundamental concern for the United States. The United States has spent almost 100 years trying to keep a favorable balance of power in Asia. And China's trying to change that. And it's doing it in a variety of ways that are very negative from the American point of view. So that's the first one. The second one is economic. And the economic one is it's focused on the high technology industries. And here, the United States is still pretty good, quite good in high technology industries. And if China dominates that, then the United States will no longer be the leader in this high technology industries and will be subservient to China. And that sounds bad for the United States, and it is sort of bad. But it's worse because modern militaries depend on high technology. And so if China is the dominant power in high technology, it will be the dominant military power. And the driving force I see, and this is my own interpretation of this, looking at it very broadly, the driving force in this Washington consensus is we don't want to be dominated by China. That's the fundamental thing. And the danger, I think, is quite real. I don't think this is made up. The Indo-Pacific strategy fits in both of these areas. Obviously, in the violent balance of power, Asia fits, but it also fits in the high technology competition, because allies and partners are critical in the United States in dealing with these high technology challenges. So that brings us to the situation this year and the determination. You know, you look at Joseph Biden and you say, is he really a determined guy? You know what I mean? He seems like, he's like my next door neighbor. You know, I mean, he's sort of one of those guys. Is he really that determined? And I think he is. It's a remarkable thing. He wasn't this way. It's very important to remember this. He wasn't this way when he was a candidate. He dismissed the China challenge. It's not important. We're much more powerful than China. He would say that repeatedly in the campaign. And he was not alone. Does anybody know who Jake Sullivan was? You know, we know who he is. He's the national security advisor. He was a key advisor in 2019. And he said this: public in the United States isn't concerned about China. I don't think we need to be concerned about China. They changed. They changed a lot when they came into power. And for a whole host of reasons. But the upshot of this is that this kind of firmness in dealing with China in the high technology area is quite important for the United States. So these are critical areas. But going into this year, people, what did we have? We had the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And predictions were that will distract the United States from Asia. They won't pay attention to China. It didn't do that. What it did is focus more on what China's doing with Russia. And when they focused more on what China's doing with Russia, they saw, my God, they're right with them every step, almost every step of the way. And this is something that's very negative from the American point of view. So they reinforced this kind of antipathy toward the PRC. And then they started saying, well, look at Taiwan. And Taiwan is like, it's Xi Jinping's Ukraine, you see. I mean, he wants to unify the country, and that's what Putin wants to do with Ukraine. And so the discourse got very mixed up between these two things, a lot of worry about Taiwan. And then you had this issue with Speaker Pelosi going to Taiwan. And then you had 4 days of live fire exercises all around Taiwan, very impressive demonstration of forces on the part of the PRC, missiles flying over Taiwan and so forth. And this led to a real debate. So was this going to stop the Washington consensus? Was this going to stop this debate? Who debated? Well, a lot of China specialists debated. Business people debated this. Specialists that had interest with China, technology people, this kind of thing. They were among this group. And what they said, you're exaggerating the China threat. We need to strive for a good, solid, stable relationship with China. That's what we need. We need to have that good, solid, stable relationship. And therefore, we need to have nuance in our approach. We need to treat all the elements and have a thing laid out very nicely. Well, the Washington consensus isn't about that. And that's the difference. In other words, those are foreign policy experts, and they want to have this nice package. And that's going to take a long time. And you're going to have to negotiate with China. And China is very good at negotiating and continuing the challenges. What the Washington consensus want to do is, how do we defend ourselves against the challenges? That comes first. Then we can talk about having this stable relationship. But first, defense comes first. And so, who won? What happened as a result of this? What do you see in reaction to the Pelosi visit and the Chinese show of force? Has Mr. Biden been passive, not saying things and reluctant to do things? No. He went on television and said, we'll defend Taiwan if it's attacked by China. Did the US government back away? No, they started trade negotiations with Taiwan. They 1 billion more weapons were sold to Taiwan. 2 cruises went through the Taiwan Strait. Cruises are bigger than destroyers. Usually just a single destroyer goes through. 2 cruises went through. It's a signal. And so it went through the Strait. And then the Congress, it was just a crescendo of actions by the Congress. You had the Chips and Science Act that passed. You had the Anti-Inflation Act, which is full of provisions that are critical of China and excluding China from climate change issues. And you had, of course, the most recent imposition of these restrictions on computer technology that's designed to really hamper China's growth. So that's the situation we're in. And so the Indo-Pacific strategy fits in all of these categories. But looking out, what I see is Mr. Xi Jinping's watched him, he's a determined guy. He's very determined. But this side is determined too. And so what's happening? What is happening? The US was very passive in the face of these various Chinese infractions. They didn't want to jeopardize the overall relationship. Mr. Obama was classic in this regard. He just said, the overall relationship is really important for us. And so we can't let Taiwan or other things upset that. And he followed that to the very end of his administration. And that was fairly common. But now it's very different. And so what are they doing? They're taking countermeasures. This is painful to China. These things weren't there before. When that happens, what's going to happen? Tensions will rise. Xi Jinping is not going to be happy about this. There's going to be tension. And so this is my message, unfortunately. But I think this is where we are at. This means that we're going to have more tension with China. It's not going to get less. It's going to be more. And so my students don't like this. I understand they want to make the world better and all that sort of stuff, fix things and that type of thing. I understand that completely. And I do too. I wasn't like this. 5 years ago, I wasn't like this at all. Evidence. It just changes your whole approach. You just look at the stuff and you say, look at what's going on here, look at what's going on here. And the evidence just overwhelms you. And I'm constantly gathering evidence. So it's a you know, I'm an old guy, but I'm still doing all this stuff because it's just consuming me. And so the bottom line here is that I'm not too worried about this yet. You can manage this. I'm really old. I remember the Cold War. You know, I worked in the U.S. government during the Cold War, and it was always tense. Everything was tense. And so, but we survived. We did it. We managed it. And I look at how Biden's team is managing Putin. You know, that's dangerous stuff that they're talking about, the tactical nuclear weapons that they're talking about with Putin. And so, but they're managing it. And so I think we can manage this. I think we can manage this. And I'm glad my government is defending itself and we're defending the country. And so, and I do agree with this danger. I think these things, and I, as an intelligence officer, and an advisor to Congress, I was always known for being very boring. In other words, I would give them all the details, and if they didn't go to sleep as a result of that, we calmed them down. I just calmed them down. I said, the expectations you have about China, it's going to be wonderful. We're going to make $1 zillion. That's not going to happen. And war with China isn't going to happen. It's going to be something in the middle here. That's what I always did. So I try to be very fair on this, but when I look at these dangers, I think, yes. So let me stop there and we can have our questions about the Indo-Pacific situation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Professor Sutter, on your remarks. So with the coming out with the publishing of the Biden administration's overall Indo-Pacific security policy, one of the most important points that Biden marked was connectivity. That means contributing to an empowered, unified ASEAN, strengthening the Quad and delivering on its commitments, and forging connections between the Indo-Pacific and the Euro-Atlantic. But I feel like one of the things that hasn't really been sort of addressed there is that these sort of policies always sort of emphasize the importance of inclusiveness in the pursuit of the region that is free and open and peaceful and prosperous. But the questions arises when the more the United States sort of avoids including China in its regional initiatives, the more obvious that those efforts are aimed at excluding and targeting Beijing. And I feel like it also have sometimes something to do with Americans' overall determination on sort of deterring China. So my questions right here is fully excluding China in the United States regional interest in the Indo-Pacific?
I think it's a very good question. I think the United States is open to China if they behave the way these norms in these organizations are stated. And so I think that this can work well if the Chinese will do that, but likely they're not going to do it. They're determined to do it their way. I mean, when you look at the challenges that China poses to global governance, the challenges they pose to the existing international economic order, these are enormous, and they've been going on for decades. And so they're finally calling them on them and say, well, yeah, but you're going to. So I think we have this competition. It's well known, and so it's inclusive, but you have to conform to certain norms and rule of law is very important. Protection of territory, respecting boundaries, this kind of thing, which the Chinese don't do. And so I think I just think it's better left unsaid. You don't have to talk about it very much. And it's obvious what the US is doing. And the Chinese are very vocal in talking about containment and this type of thing. So you're right. I mean, to make it attractive to governments in Asia that want to hedge is hard. That's very hard because it's a. But I think they're trying, and they do that through building areas of common ground that don't involve China. The vaccine, you can get vaccines. You don't have to be anti-China to get vaccines. You see what I mean? They build maritime capacity. That's not necessarily anti-China. It can work that way. So I think there's a lot of that going on right now, particularly in Southeast Asia. The country there is really reluctant to take sides at all. So, but you want to win them over to some degree. So you focus on the things that are good for them and they can do it without being punished by China.
Of course. And also talking about with Southeast Asia, one of the most important. One of the most important regional structure that would be the ASEAN. So the real question here is that, as the Biden administration is trying to strengthen the Quad and also, supporting like more of an active role of ASEAN in this region, how could the Quad cooperate with ASEAN? How could these two organizations cooperate to address the current challenges and forming a more straightforward, a more direct consensus towards China? Because some countries in Southeast Asia, they're still sort of lingering on, either to choose which side it's going to pick. So I feel like addressing that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I don't think can I switch? No. Okay, that's a very good point. I think the weakness here is that ASEAN doesn't want to make a decision on where the ASEAN countries generally want to hedge in this situation. And so the Quad works with them in other areas. These areas of common ground, climate change, economic revival, and vaccines, health issues, these kinds of things, and maritime awareness and fishing awareness. These are all very positive things that the Quad is doing that can be very much welcomed, I think, by ASEAN, and it's consistent with ASEAN's goals as well. So I think that's the approach that they're taking, and the administration seems to be taking, I think it's valid, and so you deal with the areas which are not overly sensitive to China. The concern that ASEAN countries have is it's multifaceted, and what they don't talk about very much is that they're very concerned that they're going to be punished by China. In other words, if you take a stance and do something that China doesn't like, they do things to you right away, and they know that, and they don't want that to happen. So China has, and this is not WTO compliant. They just stop the trade, or they stop the tourist, or they stop something else, and they can do this very quickly. So they know that, and Biden won't punish. You see, and that's it. So that's the real. America doesn't have that asset that Biden can really punish them. He can't, and so they know that, and so it's that kind of a situation, which doesn't put the U.S. in a very advantageous position. What you've found is that China's overbearing behavior has so alienated countries like Japan, Australia, and India that they too fear dominance, just like the Americans do, and so they have that common ground. And Taiwan feels this way, but the others all.
And obviously in response to this sort of hedging towards the Southeast Asian countries, as well as this one of the other big topics in Biden's security strategy, maritime security. I personally believe that the South China Seas, and especially China's artificial islands, as well as China's expansive, overall, even exaggerated, claims to these islands and shores in South China Sea. Does the claims and action of China sort of change the decision-making of Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Brunei? Do the islands make it more or less likely that these countries will sort of comply with China's demands, or would it make it more, hedging towards the US?
I used to think that it would make them seriously consider siding with the United States against China. Basically, I no longer think that way. I really do think that these countries are very much afraid of moving against China in a significant way. And so I don't think the Biden administration can expect them to do anything significant that would be, and that China would object to in a major way. That may change. Keep in mind that the United States, probably their biggest weakness in the region is that they've been erratic. And the Trump administration saw the need for a tough policy toward China, and they led the way in that regard, but they didn't carry it out effectively. And Mr. Trump, he really got in the way with his demands for special trade agreements with these countries, and criticizing them for the trade deficits with the United States and so forth. And so, and his commitment to allies and partners seemed to be very transactional and weak. And so these countries worry that Mr. Biden, they like Mr. Biden's approach. He's very committed to the allies and partners, but they look at his approval ratings and say, well, he's got 43% like them on a good day. And so that's not very good. And so will he be around in 2 more years? And who will take his place? And I think they worry a lot about an America First president, because they worry what that would mean for them. And they therefore, they logically then make the judgment, well, we're not going to take a risk to be out there in front of China and offensive to China when the US won't, in 2 years, won't back us up very much. So that's a big problem for the United States. And that will only come with time. We have to keep doing this, what Biden's doing, and keep doing it for some time.
Of course. Thank you, Professor Sutter. And, when it especially comes to the regional cooperation and their siding, in between United States as well as China, Indo-Pacific, the reason why that I feel like the United States sort of changes narrative from Asia Pacific to Indo-Pacific is because of the India. So, and also there seems to be an increasing realization in India that peaceful, prosperous Indo-Pacific is vital to its national interest. So, and obviously with its several border clashes, as well as, domestic boycotting and sanction towards Chinese softwares and products, do you see India in the near future playing a more than a major role in, the Indo-Pacific politics?
Yes, I think they're very much involved right now, and I think they're a constructive partner for the Quad, and they're doing a lot of different things, and I think that will go forward. I think they will continue to do that. I think their concern about China is very strong, and I don't think they can. I sense they can't handle this on their own. They need help, and I think the U.S. is very important, but the Quad is a very good way to do this as well, because it doesn't align India directly with the United States. It's a way of diffusing that to some degree. So so those are the observations I made. But I think your basic argument is right. India is one of these countries that's looked at the balance sheet and said, "My God, China is a real negative for us, and we have to do something about it."
And obviously, India, with its population, its military forces, as well as its economy, could make us such an important partner in the United States, specifically, in the entire Indo-Pacifics. So one of my other questions, obviously has to do with the international organizations or the agreements such as Quad. So, and obviously when nations come together and sign a combined document, a form and combined pact as such, there might be coming a little bit of a realization that by signing these sort of like agreements, by cooperating with other countries, each of the member will be losing a little bit of their maybe sovereignty, let it be sovereignty, let it be military capability, let it be national interests. So how would the countries across the Indo-Pacific region balances their own losses against their own gains?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think, as I tried to hint and indicate earlier, if they feel under tremendous pressure from China, if they feel that if they fear dominance, then they're going to look for help. And so these kinds of calculations will be a lot easier because you're facing a very serious situation. And I think those three powers I mentioned are like that. And they have that kind of calculus, roughly speaking. But the other countries aren't there yet. They don't have it yet. They don't see that so much. And in many cases, maybe they don't face it. I mean, if you have a country like Cambodia that very closely cooperates with China, well, China's not going to pressure Cambodia. Everything's going fine in that kind of a situation. You only find the pressure when you want to take a position that China disagrees with, and then that's when you have your friction and the pressures being put on you.
Thank you, Professor Sutter. And also considering Indo-Pacific, one of the United States' one of the more important, or I suppose, creative new strategies will be sort of expanding the U.S.'s diplomatic presence, in the Pacific Islands. And obviously, so how important is sort of this like soft power versus hard power influence battle going on between the U.S. and China over the Indo-Pacific Islands? Because back in June and July, China just signed this security pact with Solomon Islands. So what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are that this has been an area where the United States has an important role in some of these countries. The compact countries. We have a compact with 3 of these countries, but left it mainly to Australia and New Zealand to keep the security situation in the region, and that has not been enough, obviously. And so here, what you find is that the basic lay of the land in the Pacific Islands is very pro U.S. It seems to me. From a values point of view, from a religious point of view, and the background of the people there. And I think the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Coast Guard, the military that deal with these areas, they understand the Pacific Way. And if you thought the ASEAN way was slow, the Pacific Way is really slow. And so, and the Chinese really showed that they had the fact that Wang Yi went in and said everybody agreed to this thing within a week was an amazingly inept type of thing to do from the Pacific Way perspective. And so my sense is that the U.S. has a good base. The U.S. backed forces has a good base, and the administration has been very prompt now in doing all sorts of things. They have a new strategy. They have to build a couple of embassies, and building soft power and using that and persuasion on the countries. And I think that this is going to work fine. Of course, Australia, New Zealand, and Japan are all in favor of it, and the UK is also involved in this. And the French are in the background. French have a lot of holdings in the Pacific Islands. They're very important there as well. So when you add all this up, China's pushing against an entity, an area that's hard for them to really have a lot of leverage over. This Solomon Islands leader, they have leverage on him, but and his government. But and they can use that, and that's corruption in a lot of ways. And the corruption is it's a big problem in the region, and Chinese are really good at using corruption. And so this is and the U.S. is not good at that because it's against the law. It's really hard to do. And so the result of this, but nonetheless, I think the Chinese seem to be in a hurry, and the U.S. but making progress for them is going to be hard because they have this resistance on the part of individuals that say they want respect, like most countries, but they're very sensitive to this because they're small countries. They want respect, and they want a say in what's happening to them. And they don't want somebody coming in and tell them that this is the way it's going to be. And so I think I think this government in the United States understands that. And I think the Australian government, the New Zealand government, and Japan all understand this. And they have legacies in these places that are going back decades and that I think are very disruptive.
And obviously, to follow up on that, just on the Chinese perspective, do you personally believe that Chinese approach is, Chinese sort of exerting its influence over these islands? Do you think these are just like pinpoint short-term experiment, or does China have a longer, more strategic approach towards establishing relationships with these countries?
Well, I think it's multifaceted, don't you? For example, Australia has moved away from China. It was very close to China 5 years ago. Now it's just like the United States. It's very, very negative. How do you show Australia you're going to pay a cost for that? You're going to pay a cost. And this is a very sensitive area for Australia and New Zealand. This is their strategic flank. And Australia is a continent, and they try to defend it. And there are 23 million people, 24 million people. And trying to defend that thing is really hard. And when you have the whole flank on the east and south is vulnerable, usually you're just worried about the north. Now you have to worry about, that's just a tremendous cost. And so it has that benefit, if you will. And it diverts attention from other issues. It has a lot of benefits, conceivable benefits. What the Chinese were thinking, I don't know. But it has a number of conceivable benefits.
Thank you. And then obviously one other factor is that the Biden administration put in their Indo-Pacific strategy is about the regional prosperity. And one of the most important subpoints of this factor is advancing resilience and secure supply chains that are diverse, open, as well as predictable. Obviously, I feel like the overall supply chain security has sort of been undermined, especially after after Russia's ongoing invasion that had carried on with Ukraine. But also, there are some other factors. I feel like the policy itself is mainly targeted towards China, is for these United States partners as well as regional countries in the region to sort of enter like a gradual steps of decoupling from Chinese manufacturing, Chinese industries. So how has the Russian-Ukraine conflict that has sort of undermined the global supply chain elasticity affected United States approach to addressing a secure supply chain?
Well, I think this is something I should have mentioned earlier. One of the big pluses that emerges in 2022 is the European reaction to Putin's invasion of Kuwait, or Ukraine, and the linking of that to China. Just as the hardening of the American attitude, it hardened the European attitude as well toward China and its posture in basically supporting Russia in so many ways, in criticizing Western support for Ukraine, this type of thing. And so that tendency means that the European powers are now looking at China, what China does in Asia, and taking tougher stance on it, as well as taking common stances with the United States and others on supply chain issues and these decisions disadvantage China in a serious way. So when the imposition of these restrictions on high technology, computer technology, were instituted, the allies in Europe are a big part of this, as well as in the region. But on the Indo-Pacific strategy, what you find is that these European powers are now playing a role, like in the Pacific Islands, the French as well as the British, and are playing a role in the South China Sea and on Taiwan. They're much more prominent on Taiwan. So that's a big advantage for the United States, and it's recent, and it's a result of Putin's invasion of Ukraine.
And of course, may I just have one last question? So this will be the one last question for me, and this has to do with obviously the security within the Indo-Pacific, and as some of you guys are aware, Xi Jinping, during the 20th Communist Party Congress speech, he made a very ambitious remark on achieving the goal of national unification with regard, to unify Taiwan with China. So and obviously the U.S. right now is starting brand new initiatives, is strengthening extended deterrence and coordination with Japanese and Korean allies. So if there comes the eventuality, the unfortunate eventuality where China begins an invasion towards Taiwan, how could the United States regional partners help deter China's aggression?
If China invaded Taiwan, or how could they help deter that? Is that what you're saying?
How could the U.S. partners help deter a possible Chinese?
To have a sense of a united front, that this would not, that there would be consequences by each of these parties if China did such a thing. And you don't have to be graphic about it, just make the sense that there's that these countries agree with the United States and how it's handling this issue, and aggression will have grave consequences. Just that, and you could equate it to the consequences that Putin faces in Ukraine. I think you could do something like that, and that would show solidarity. But I think the bottom line is doing stuff, getting prepared, and I think that's the need for Taiwan to do that. The need for Japan to do that is very strong, and the need for the U.S. to do it is very strong as well. And so you have to be ready to deal with this military danger, and I don't think we're ready for that. So I think it's something that would be a signal that of determination.
Thank you.
All right, we will now begin a brief 15-minute question and answer period. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and a microphone will be brought to you.
Here we go. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
We good? Great. Hi, sir. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you.
And my question is going to be focusing on strategic ambiguity, to where it seems like with President Biden's recent comments, as well as something that caught my eye recently from Hudson Institute's Miles Yu, is the argument that we live in an era of strategic clarity with tactical ambiguity. In your assessment, do you believe that strategic ambiguity is still relevant today and should remain the U.S. position? Or is strategic ambiguity effectively dead and we're now on the path towards some form of strategic clarity?
Thank you for the excellent question. I haven't read Miles Yu's piece yet, but Miles Yu was Mr. Pompeo's main China advisor during his Pompeo's stint as Secretary of State. So he was a very important figure in American policy at that time. I guess I spent an awful lot of time as a government official working on the Taiwan issue. That was always, when I was a national intelligence officer, that was the big issue at that time. This was 1999, 20 years ago, 1999, 2000. And it's often the big issue. And what happens, folks, is that it's always a big issue in that sense. What happens is that something happens, and then everybody starts looking at a situation, and they look at Taiwan. They say, look at that situation. Taiwan's tiny, mainland China is big, mainland China is determined, and what's preventing them from taking it over? Why don't, this is dangerous, right? Very dangerous situation. We could have a war over this. And I've been through that, many, many times in my experience, and it never happened. 70 years we've had this kind of thing, of tension, but no action, and that's no major action. It's serious now. I don't want to dismiss this. It's serious, very serious now. But what makes it work? Well, I think one thing that makes it work is the American One China policy. And the American One China policy is very vague. And it's full of possibilities of whatever you want to do. Gives you a lot of flexibility. But if you go to strategic ambiguity and strategic clarity, I think that's going to end the American one China policy. And I don't think that's a good idea. I think because we need to have something we can go to Xi Jinping and said, look, we're not ending the one China policy. Now, so then, then you get them to cool it. And you have a way of dealing with the situation. If we did the ending of the one China policy, if we had strategic clarity, well, you basically, you may just start moving to recognize Taiwan as an independent country or something like that. And I think that's just asking for trouble. I don't think we want to ask for trouble. We want to manage it in this sense. And I think that, so I think this is a mistake. I think it's because, sorry, America's willingness to defend Taiwan will always be ambiguous, it seems to me, unless we have a defense treaty. The president can say that, but then, okay, he's president now, but then what about later presidents? Or what if he's president in 2022, but maybe in 2023, he may not feel that way. So so why lock yourself in? Why antagonize Beijing unnecessarily at this point? What's the purpose? And I think the purpose should be strengthen Taiwan, strengthen Japan, strengthen yourself in dealing with the economically, politically, and from a security point of view, strengthen. And that's what they've been doing. It's sort of been under the radar, incremental steps, but that's what the Beijing salami slicing, if you will. I'm adding salami rather than slicing it off, and making Taiwan stronger. And this has been going on since 2019. Very impressive stuff. And so I think that's going to continue, and that's good. And so do that rather than posture. What do you get from a posture? I don't know what you get from it. And except, you deepen the antagonism, and I think it's unnecessary at this point.
Hi, Professor. So with the recent comprehensive export control of chips to China from the United States and the technology to make those chips and the potential that gets expanded to other advanced technologies as well, do you think that these export controls mark the beginning of a real decoupling, strategic decoupling? And what do you think their impact will be, and how do you think China will respond? And if they will respond, if they can respond in a very significant way?
Right, it's a very good question. The framework is very impressive. It has to be implemented. We're a porous society, and we're running up against a society that's not porous. It's very tightly controlled, and they're able to exploit porous societies. And so leakage is a big problem. And how we're going to guard against that, I'd like to see it. I want to see who the policeman is going to be to monitor all of this stuff, so that there's no cheating or no fudging, because the Chinese authorities will work really hard to make sure fudging and cheating continue. And I think this is, so bottom line is the impact of this will be how it's implemented. If it's implemented in the way that they're saying it's going to be implemented, very firm way, then that will have an impact on China that'll be quite significant. And but they can't really react to this in that way. They'll have to have some, because if they retaliate, that will just worsen it from their point of view right away. Then both sides will be restricting these contacts. And so they can't, it's not like a trade dispute. It's very different in that sense. So I think that on the American side, you have an advantage in this one. You can do it, and they can't really retaliate in kind. They could do something else, they could have a linkage policy. Well, because you did this, we're going to do that. And that would be a bad consequence for the United States. But I suspect the administration's people, they expect this, and so they're prepared for whatever comes down the pike. But again, when you look at the CHIPS Act and all the money we're putting into this technology development and research, and you look at this thing and you say, but we leak. The experts in the United States that are innovative in these regards, that will make the innovation, they're interacting with others overseas all the time. How do you make sure that their colleagues who they interact with don't inform the Chinese authorities about the breakthrough or about the new technology? You don't, unless you police it. And so it's a real challenge. Because these folks, a lot of them, you remember the people I talked about don't like the China policy. These folks are part of that, and because they have all these relationships with all these people that are, could easily be informers for China. Not that they're paid agents. They're just Chinese citizens, and they could go back to China, start working there. Where'd you learn that? Oh, I got this, and then it just comes that way very easily. So monitoring this, the Congress is going to have a real oversight issue here, and then policing it from the executive branch point of view will be very important. And and who do you rely on to do that? Universities. Did you ever get a sense that you were being policed at GW? I never did. You know what I mean? Where's the authority here? I don't know. I mean, it's really loose, right? Really loose, free. That's what a university is all about, being free, not controlled. So our culture and our system, and when we're into this, we can do this. We did it in the Cold War. We can do it, but it's going to be hard. And it's going to be controversial. And people aren't going to like it in a lot of ways because it's going to be restrictive and on our freedom. And so that's and we haven't crossed that bridge yet, as far as I see. We still have a long way to go, I think, in implementing this thing. Is what I'm getting at.
Thank you.
Hello, Professor. Thank you for your remarks. And I'm from Taiwan. I just want to say I disagree about strategic clarity, because I would like to see more strategic but less ambiguity. That is what I'm going to hope. Yes, and I have two questions. First one is we talk about like a lot of US Indo-Pacific strategy, and just want to ask what is China's Indo-Pacific strategies? Like China's, their economy just slow down and they are going to more internal circulations, and they just lose their economy leverage to all these allies. So how's their plan about their Indo-Pacific? How's President Xi's Indo-Pacific strategies? And the second question is like in Americans, their economy weakness in Indo-Pacific. So are they going to back to CPTPP one day, or should they back to? I think that IPEF is.
I missed, slow down for the second part. I didn't catch what the second question.
The second part is like US have a weakness in Indo-Pacific related to economics. Like, yes, they have less economic power for the allies to cooperate with them, and it's are United States going to like back to CPTPP to strengthen its economy? Yes, and this is my two questions. Thank you.
Thanks for your question. The Chinese strategy is to preserve. It's my reading of it is to preserve and strengthen what they have. And they've set China up as the center of the supply chains in the region. And they emphasize that all the time, constantly talking about preserving these interconnected things in the region. They see the RCEP trade agreement as very beneficial to them. They want to join the CPTPP. They want to join that if they can. And so they use these multilateral groups to enhance this. But their strategy, therefore, is to rely on economic connectedness and economic beneficence coming from China. In other words, these countries benefit from different things with China. China's trade is not growing so much, but it's growing in Southeast Asia, and it's growing in this area. And so I think they like that, and they're investing more, and BRI is under review in some places, but the Belt and Road Initiative is what I'm talking about. But in Southeast Asia, almost all of these governments can pay their debts, and so they're a good place to have BRI projects. And so, from a China's point of view, I think the region, Japan, Australia, and India are problems. Southeast Asia, they're winning, and because they have these economic benefits, and in the background is their coercion. If these countries don't do what they're supposed to do, they get punished. And so they're small countries, and they can't defend themselves, and then for all sorts of reasons. So let's take a look here. What country is been most firm or most concerned about their territorial claims in the South China Sea? Vietnam. And Vietnam is tough. It fought a war with China, right? Not too long ago. Xi Jinping announces this tough policy, and who's the first leader that comes to see him after that? The Communist Party leader of Vietnam. Now, what does that tell you? That's pretty successful from the Chinese point of view. You get an endorsement from this neighbor who the US and others are trying to woo to be part of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. And they just come together and they have this wonderful meeting. So I think they're not in a bad position in Asia, generally. I think the Western countries have been alienated from the developed countries. Western countries have been alienated from China, but that's it. I think elsewhere, China's in pretty good shape. So they want to continue that.
Great, thank you. We're going to take one more question before we close for tonight.
Thank you, Professor Sutter. My name is Henry Tsai. I'm from Taiwan as well. And as we all know, Taiwan just extended its mandatory military service from 4 months to a year. And that is at least a good place to start, but I don't think that's sufficient. And my question is that, what is Taiwan supposed to do right now that we are not doing in order to strengthen our defense against a potential annexation from China? And is there any way that we can remedy that? Thank you.
It's a real dilemma. The voters in Taiwan's a democracy. They're very issues get politicized very quickly in Taiwan politics, and raising taxes to pay for defense spending is not a winner in politics in Taiwan. And so, and yet that's what they need to do. They need to spend, they need to have a bigger budget. They need to do what you just mentioned on the military side. And the Americans have lots of ideas of what they should be buying. And so usually those are things that are very defensive oriented. They're part of what they call the porcupine strategy. So they're more defensive things. But the Taiwan leaders and the defense leaders also want the ability to strike against the PRC forces. And so they want advanced aircraft, and they want submarines and missile systems that can do that. And so and getting these priorities mixed well is a job, but it's underway. And but I think just a consciousness that this is needed. A consciousness that we are under duress from Beijing. The Americans will help us, but it's not a blank check, and that they need to do their part. And citizens of Taiwan need to understand this. And
And I think that as Americans are sacrificing in lots of ways, as they are, we're not going to be as prosperous as we were when we do these kinds of things with Beijing. That's as simple as that. I think that the Washington Consensus is prepared to accept that. And I think maybe the American people are prepared. I don't know. I think they are. But people in Taiwan have a hard time with this. They want more social welfare. They have old people, and they want them to be taken care of by the state. And this kind of thing. It's it's a dilemma that most countries have. When you need more defense, you have to spend more money, and they don't want to spend the money. So hopefully, the consciousness will come, and they'll say, "We have to do this. This is essential for us." And you have a leader that's very good at this. I mean, she's a very determined individual, and so and very. I'm not sure she's persuasive, but she's a role model in a lot of ways. So for someone, and she knows how to deal with the PRC effectively. She's very good at this. She got it down.
Thank you. Can we please have a round of applause for Mike and Professor Sutter, please?
Thank you very much.
Before we close for tonight, I would like to first thank our wonderful moderator, Mike Wu, and our speaker, Professor Sutter, for sharing his thoughtful insights with us tonight. I believe we're all leaving this event with a more nuanced understanding of this crucial geopolitical arena. I would also like to extend a thank you to the dedicated team members from both the USCSO and Onero teams, including Maya Cronin, Julie Anderson, Ishani Shetri, Jerry G, Rob Bray, and Kyle Lim. To complement tonight's event, researchers from both teams have published a series of articles on US-China relations in the Indo-Pacific, which we encourage you to check out using the QR codes behind me, which I'll put up after this event. These codes behind me will lead to our websites, where you can see our other upcoming events and other research projects. We would also like to invite you to our final Youth Expo of the semester on Monday, November 14th, here in the Lindner room at 6 p.m. We will be speaking about US-China environmental policy and professional opportunities with an expert from the US Water Alliance. With all that said, I would like to thank you all for joining us tonight. Let us have one more round of applause for Mike and Professor Sutter. Thank you all again. Good night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.